But without further ado, I want to bring up our keynote speaker. Joel Freeman is someone who I've had the opportunity to meet just recently, but someone who has had just an incredible impression on me. You know, I think so much of the challenge, I'm famous for going off script, so I'm off script right now. So much of when we talk about unity and the lack thereof unity, so much of it is because we're so fixed and fixated on our space in life that we don't take a moment to just step out and see another person's perspective. And I think so much can be learned from simply taking a step out of our own life and walking in the shoes of someone else's. And so much of what I sort of admire in Joel is the fact that he's done a lot of that. He's sort of made a career out of this educating himself about the challenges and the struggles of others, particularly African Americans. But our keynote, Dr. Joel Freeman, I can call him Joel, but you have to call him Dr. served as mentor and chaplain for the NBA Washington Bullets / Wizards, those of us who are old enough to remember. They were at one point called the Bullets. Although he was a Caucasian Canadian, he learned to relate to all the members of the team. And he still is a Caucasian Canadian, by the way. That didn't change. Over the past decade, Joel has combined his entrepreneurial skills and love for history to conduct extensive research into African American history and culture. His keynote will really challenge us to put our prayers into action. Sort of, it's where the road and the rubber meet, causing us to follow in Jesus' footsteps by loving God with all of our heart, our soul, our strength, and our mind, and our neighbor as ourselves. So without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Joel Freeman.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I have until 7:55. So I'm going to bring this plane in for a landing at 7:55. So Kelly, when I have 10 minutes left, would you do the hokey pokey and turn yourself around? That's what it's all about, you know. But just to let me know that I need to bring this in. Just quickly, I brought some pieces from my collection. I have over 3,000, my wife and I have 3,000 pieces. Oldest piece dates back to 1553. We've done a number of exhibits at the UN, the White House, Clinton Presidential Library, a bunch of other places. And I have a piece up here that there's a genuine William Wilberforce letter, handwritten and signed by him, David Livingston letter that you can take a look at. And also I have something here that, you all remember Pearl Bailey?
Oh, yeah.
And she was in the movie Porgy and Bess. This one right here. Well, I have the actual check that she was paid for her part in the movie Porgy and Bess. How much do you think she made? This is 1950, let's see, what is this? 1958. She had she didn't have a lead role. What do you think? 70 bucks, 50, 500, ooh, 500. Well, I hear 1,000. Well, I'm not going to tell you. You've got to come up and look at it. And over here we have some resources. I have a book and a workbook on how every church can start an entrepreneur club, and hitchhike off the Nehemiah Project on that. And then the book and the film, Return to Glory, is a book that I co-wrote with a gentleman by the name of Don Griffin, who's African American, and Julius Irving did the foreword for it. And it was, the film is now in French, Portuguese, and Spanish, and English subtitles, and it's just been incredible, the impact that we've heard back from it. And then a book here called God is Not Fair, now in 21 languages, and it came out of a very, very dark time in my life, where I had more questions than answers. I still have more questions than answers, but there was a whole lot more questions than answers. And so that book really, I wrote that because I really had to grapple with some issues. And since then, it seems to have touched a number of people. And then also I take groups to Israel every year, twice a year, every spring and every fall. It's an educational, all-inclusive tour. It's unusual. And then to Greece once every 18 months, Footsteps of Paul and John. If you're interested in more information, feel free to sign up there. And it just is a life-changing experience if you've never been on a trip like that. How many here like comic books? Okay. Cartoons? Okay, got a few more. Not a trick question. You know, when someone has a thought in a cartoon or a comic book, they have these little thought bubbles that come above their head, and then you suddenly see in the top what they're thinking. Well, as I look around the room today, I see a whole lot of thought bubbles, and a lot of the thought bubbles are saying, what the heck is that white guy from Canada doing interested in black history? And I must say, I really don't have a very good response to that question. And but I hope this morning, in the next few moments, I'm going to try to bring into 25 or 30 minutes or so to bring something that normally would take about 3 to 5 hours, and to share a little bit. But I hope you not only hear the words, but also that you hear the music. And the music would stand for passion, believability, sincerity of heart, and that it would be something that would go with you. The music will go with you when you leave this place this morning. And I grew up in Canada, and you can see I'm right here, this little guy right here, a little town of 2,000 people with 9 ice hockey rinks. And I was on the ice from late October to early April every year. We had a rink right behind our house. And it just was about 2 to 3 hours a day minimum on the ice. It was just an incredible experience. Well, I ended up leaving home at the age of 17 and became a long-haired hippie, a dope-smoking fool, and hitchhiked probably 5,000 or 6,000 miles around North America. I don't recommend hitchhiking nowadays, but back then it was a blast, and had a wonderful time. Had a few crazy situations that I can share with you later if you want to talk one-on-one. But you know, it's just one of those situations. Then I ended up, for a long story, I ended up accepting the Lord in September 10th, 1972. Repaired things with my parents. Went to Bible school, and ultimately became a pastor for 18 years, and concurrently was working with the Washington Bullets. I was one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA, and helped to architect the whole program throughout the NBA, and helped to bring in some guys with other teams. And currently working on a book right now called Finding the Open Man, subtitled the benefits, the surprising benefits of unselfishness, using a game of basketball, which is a game of unselfishness, and talking about our everyday lives and what that means, and also telling the history of the chaplaincy program. And I'm a big fan of Gateway. By the way, I just brought something with me today.
Wow.
My favorite part of second grade was show and tell, and I haven't grown up. This is the Shaq shoe. What size is it? 23. Who said 22? Man, would you make sure that he gets some kind of a pat in the back or a special prize, give him a pen or something like that. Size 22. This is 16 inches long, weighs about 2 pounds. So think about that when you strap on the 2-pound weights to do your Zumba or whatever you do. And you can take a sniff of it if you want to. We'll pass. Okay. But I'll put that up here, and here's and you can take a look at that. Why do I bring that? First of all, very few people have seen a shoe that size that Ronald McDonald was wearing. And secondly, it's because when one starts thinking about life in those shoes, not Shaq necessarily, but it's a crazy life. I mean, you can walk into a restaurant and get the best seats. You make more in one evening for most of the players than about 80% of the world makes an entire lifetime. You have all kinds of opportunities coming at you. You sometimes don't know the agenda of someone until 2 or 3 years has passed, and then it drops on you, and you realize, oh, that's why you were hanging around all this time. Oh, I get it. And it makes you very cynical And they have a special radar, that they can determine. And that's part of being a chaplain, was just letting them know, I love you for who you are. It's confidential. It's not going to show up in the Washington Post on Tuesday morning in the sports section, which you tell me. And it's not going to show up in a book. It's going to be something between you and me. And there's stuff that I'm holding until my grave. My wife, I've not shared stuff with my wife, because that's the way it is in working with these guys. And but one of the real reasons is we kind of switch the channel here. Is what's life like in your shoes? What's the upside of you? What are the gifts, the talents, the abilities, the skills that God has given you as an individual? And also on the downside, what are some of the challenges, the insecurities, the unconscious bias stuff that we all struggle with on so many different levels? What are some of the areas of intimidation and fear and jealousy and just the stupid stuff, that we all go through? First comes that which is natural, then comes that which is spiritual, Paul told us. And I just learned, I'm in a crazy situation, I got some natural stuff going on inside of me, I just embrace it and say, that's me. I've got to own it. And then I say, Lord, you take over. And then that which comes is spiritual. And I think it's an important thing to consider. And that's why we're here today, is to pray to the Lord, to get to know Him on a whole nother level today, but also to take a look at life in our shoes and how we connect with each other, cross-racially, ethnicity, and gender, and generation. You hear so much about, millennials are lazy and entitled, and you hear about other races, and just all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on. What enters a person's mind just comes out of their mouth. And I just think it's so important to, like Augustine said in the 4th century, he says, seek to understand before seeking to be understood, which does not preclude the need to be understood. It just means there's a chronological sequence to being understood. And if we all practice that over the next 30 days, and every associate, every family member, every next door neighbor, every person at church, every person at work, just say, I am going to seek to understand. That's what I'm all about. If you look at me, I'm seeking to understand, seeking to understand. And then if and when someone seeks to understand what I'm thinking, that's icing on the cake. It's remarkable. It's a wonderful gift to be understood. But that's the whole idea of every one of us here in our spheres of influence just seeks to understand. Literally, revival can begin to emerge in our everyday experiences with people. And so I'm a big fan of gateways. The thing about gateways is that you and I, we all have different gateways to different levels of awareness. And I'm here to share my gateway. If you were standing here, you could share your gateways of things that have helped to open your mind and your heart to new things. And so please try to think, as I'm sharing my gateway, think about your gateways. And as you begin to share with other people your gateway to awareness and new understanding about certain things in your life. And so I want to talk a little bit about my journey and talk about some historical things, and then unity prayer and action. Sometimes I watch on TV when there's some crazy situation that's happened somewhere in the country or the world, and then someone comes on, some talking head says, well, we need to have a conversation about this. And I want to yell at the TV set, say, okay, let's talk about it, but then let's do something. Let's develop action plans. Let's get dirt under our fingernails, and let's really do this thing and work this thing out. And it's kind of like marriage. My wife and I, we don't agree on everything, but you know what? We disagree within the framework of commitment to each other. And that's kind of maybe not a full-on metaphor, but I think you get the picture, is it's all about trust. Growing trust takes time. It just takes time. It takes risking. It's like investing money. If you invest in a 1% deal that is low risk, and you've got a guaranteed return of 1%, you're good with that. But if you're going to go for high return, you've got to do high risk. And I personally have chosen to live my life, and I'm surrounded by people, I believe, who have chosen this also, to be a high-risk person in that sense. To take risks with people and say, you can attack my head, but not my heart. But I got to ask this question. I got to understand this. Help me to understand this. and to deputize certain people in your life that can maybe be your cultural guides, maybe your historical guides, that help you to understand as best as you can. Nothing is monolithic, just one person has an opinion, but at least get some hints and some ideas of what that person is thinking as a representative of their race, their class, generation, gender, whatever it might be. And so it becomes something where we've all heard the purpose-driven life. What about the curiosity-driven life? You know, we're just kind of looking around the corner. What am I going to learn today? Like Isaiah said in Isaiah 50, verse 4, he says, "Wake my ear in the morning, that I may have a word in season to them who are weary." And to think of how we start our days every day. We started today, last night, just before we slipped into semi-consciousness and fell asleep. We started our day last night, like the Shabbat, like Sabbath. It starts the evening before. And it's just preparing our hearts all the time to be curious and to be open and to wonder, you know, I'm in a tough situation, I'm up to my tail in alligators. I'm curious to wonder how this is going to work out. So I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to hang in there. I'm going to learn from this. And somehow, some way, I'm going to become a better person. Give people a clearer view of Jesus Christ so that there's not a lot of impediments to get to know Jesus Christ as people watch us and look at us. So gateways is a big thing to consider. That's why I have a Black History collection. You know why? I saw guys, folks, that could have whatever entered their mind they could do. Whatever entered their mind they could have. Whatever they entered their mind they could experience. They had the capital to do so and the relationships to make it happen. But you put a Frederick Douglass letter in their hand. A handwritten, original Frederick Douglass letter in their hand. And there's something, it's just that it almost become like a little kid in the presence of that history. And so I realized that this is something that helps to open up hearts and minds of people. It transcends race. It is a transformational type of experience and opens up people's hearts to want to talk and dialogue and create curiosity within them so that then we can be curious together about some things that maybe can bring us into a deeper level of a relationship and trust with each other. So it's all about gateways, for me anyway, and I hope that you can become a fan of this by the time we finish this morning. And so, you know, basically, I approach all of this as a learner. You look at me very carefully. I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. I've learned so much more by listening and just being quiet and asking open-ended questions and just then shutting up and then asking more questions and listening, then listening some more, and then listening some more. And some of us who are Caucasian, we have this thing when something comes up about race relations, we immediately want to say something like, well, my grandparents, you know, I had no one, my family I know this owned slaves. They came from Ireland or Italy or, you know, whatever, or from Europe, and they came over here in the 20s. There's no slave trade, and so, you know, I got no problems here. You know, let's talk. And immediately you can see someone of another ethnicity they shut right down. It's like, okay, here we go. We can talk about sports. We might be able to talk about Jesus, but how deep is Jesus in your life if you respond in that way? You know, when you think about what that really means. And so it's the whole idea of being a learner, listening, and then original sources. I love reading books, but I love reading first edition books from the 1700s, the 1800s, because so many of our modern books, they take an excerpt. You know, you might get a paragraph or two. I want to know what was before that paragraph. I want to know what was after that paragraph. I want to see the original edition and capture the essence of the writer. And then reporting versus explaining, that simply means everything we're going to talk about today, I can barely explain a thimbleful of what I'm talking about this morning. It's all about, I can report what I've heard, I can report what I've experienced, and report what I've tried to understand, but I can't explain. And I'm very comfortable with that. And it's many times when I do events like this in various parts of the country, we have an ending period where we have questions. And you know what? I call it Q&R. I don't call it Q&A. I don't have many answers. But I will respond. So that's where my Q&R comes from. And I will tell you exactly what I'm thinking. You will know, and we'll have all hands on the table. But I'm not here as a purveyor of answers. Because
We know who the answer is, the capital A, and we're all seeking for the lowercase a's and answers in our lives. But it's as we focus on the person, then these lowercase a answers begin to make some sense to us. And sometimes we can't understand, and we're comfortable with that too. I don't understand about this or that, but you know, I'm comfortable with that, and I love you just the way you are. You come in my zone, 5-foot zone, you can be who you are. You can vote for a certain person or not vote for a certain person. We can go all kinds of ways, and I'm comfortable with that. Because I think it goes so much deeper, and there's so many things that the media and our society try to bring division in. I watch very little news because it's just everything is built to gin it up and to just kind of get people separated, and all the talking heads. And I just say, you know what, I'm through with that. You know, all thing about Facebook and social media, it's all about getting people off social media, and let's talk on the phone. Let's get together at Starbucks or $4, whatever you want to call it. You know, let's get together. Let's connect, because when we communicate, you know, about 7% of communication is what we say. Only 10% is what we say. About 40% is how we say it, the decibel level, the intensity of voice, and whatever. And then 50%, you know what that is? It's body language. So the higher level of importance, the higher level of potential impact on relationship, the higher level of complexity, we need to be face-to-face, talking with each other. Because if you start a Twitter war or a text war, you're only operating at best 7 to 10% communication. And guess what? There's a whole lot of ways to miss each other, to miss the intent behind the things that are being said, and it can get stir up so quickly. Next thing you know, I'm blocking you on Facebook. You know, so what the heck? What's going on with that? You know, and so it's the whole idea of connecting as much as we can. You know what? We're not going to put all the pieces of the puzzle together here in our few minutes together, but I'm hoping we can nudge those pieces a little bit closer together. The pieces that have to do with discrimination, affirmative action, economic justice, anger, the whole history of slavery, social justice and injustice, prejudices, colonialism, all that stuff that swirls around this particular topic in so many different ethnicities around the world. You know, when Great Britain and the sun didn't set on the British Empire, it was all over the world. Crazy colonialism going on. And we can go into all kinds of things about that. Another thing is that reading books is a great thing too. As you can, what can happen is, this really made an impact on me, Egypt Revisited, and then also Black Spark, White Fire. And then a website I put together. If you want to write this down and take a look at it in your own time, it'll take hours to get through this website. It's my gift to the educational world. And because you have Afrocentrism and Eurocentrism. And Afrocentrism and Eurocentrism, many times you go into a Greek 101, history of Greek 101, you say, were the Egyptians black? You can start a whole war right there. You know, just goes crazy. And so the whole idea, what I wanted to do in this website, and I'm not going to go into detail, it's up to you to check it out if you want to, but it's the whole idea of doing a definition of both, and then an honest critique of both, and then introducing the whole concept of truth centrism, which is not the destination, it's the essence of the journey, getting to that destination, developing rules of engagement so we have more light than heat when we talk about the topic. And I go into evolution, the great chain of being, and the whole history of what has brought us to where we are today. The history, the deep history behind it, the hard history, the history that hurts, the painful history that brings us to where we are today and what we talk about. Another book that's great, I think, is called How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. Now, one of the things that people think about Africa, they say, well, you know, is these Christians that came in and they took away the ancient African traditions, the traditional tradition, the traditional religions. And this book shows how Christianity spread. You know, Alexandria, Egypt, and through the rivers, Nile, and some of the rivers going to the west and some going south. The Christian message began to go through the whole region. And you have folks like Tertullian and Cyprian and Augustine. You know, these are all in North Africa, and we can see some very interesting tentacles, in a good sense, of Christianity moving throughout the whole continent of Africa. Very fascinating stuff. And then we have Isaiah. This is when people ask me, what got you interested in black history? I tell you, it was not the social and the justice issues that got my attention. And so if you are someone trying to pound some sense into somebody, realize it's not going to be the thing that might be of interest to you. It might be something else. For me, it was the Bible. And it was the whole idea when I heard about Isaiah chapter 18, where it talks about an ethnically specific group of people from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, a geographically specific group of people that were presidents of the planet. And so here this verse says, Isaiah is talking to a people in a land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, and Cushite, Sudanese Africa. Go to a nation tall, extended, stretched out, smooth of skin, polished, furbished skin. And to a people terrible. That's King Jimmy's way of saying they're awesome, to be feared. From the beginning onward. And that's the phrase right there that grabbed me, because I said there must be a lot of extra biblical evidence to support and corroborate what the Scripture's talking about. They're terrible from the beginning onward. And so that's what drove me to extra biblical evidence regarding the basis for this. This is around 714 BC. And you have folks like Tarharka, who, by the way, here's his image, or that's an artist rendition, but you have, these are some images of Tarharka. And he's mentioned in 2 Kings 19, Isaiah chapter 37. That's part of my journey, is finding out the Pharaoh. Who is the Pharaoh that Moses was talking to when he said, let my people go? And there's two different theories about 1290 or 1440 BC. And depending on what date you put at that, there's different pharaohs. And so then you get to see, what these guys look like. And you begin to start putting some things together visually. And there's something dramatic that happens when one starts studying the Scripture in that manner. And so this was written around the time of Tarharka, who was not the pharaoh at the time, but he was the leader of the army. He was the general of the army. And then there's another verse in Nahum, chapter 3 and verse 9, right around the same time, 713 BC. It says, Ethiopia and Egypt's strength was infinite. And once again, that's boundless, without limit. And that's, once again, the Bible's not given to hyperbole or exaggeration. This was an incredible period of time right around the 25th dynasty of ancient Egypt. And so what happened is I ended up co-writing a book called Return to Glory. And Don wrote the first half. I wrote the second half. He dealt with all the historical information. And what happened to me is, when you write a book, you have to put your name on it. And then you do a bibliography, and you say, these are the wells we drew our water from. And so that brought me to a whole other level of depth and seriousness about what I was involved with. Because if you put your name on something, it better stand the test. And so what I did is I began to look at the mental, emotional aspects. And what happened is my study, my PhD work in psychology, began to realize there's the grieving process. And grief has to do with loss. The loss of an appendage, the loss of a dream, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job. And grief is just as natural as the law of gravity, is just as powerful as the law of gravity. And I don't care how spiritual you are, I don't care how much information, biblical information stuffed between your ears, you are and I am going to go through grieving process when we lose something. That's part of our human condition. God even endorsed it. Moses gone, grieve for 30 days. Could have been 45 days, could have been 60 days, could have been 10 days. God says, go ahead and grieve. And then finally there came a point when Joshua said, this is the Joel Freeman edition, the therapeutic value of your grief has diminished to the point now, so we now say, arise and let's be going over to the Jordan into the land of promises. And so the point is that when it comes to grieving, in terms of co-writing this book, I began to interview African-American men over the age of 85, over the age of 35. And what happened is I began to ask them questions. You can imagine on a suspicion scale, from somewhat suspicious to extremely suspicious, banging on the center of the scale, right? And so here's a white guy from Canada coming, I've got some questions to ask you. You know, Ralph told me to talk with you because you might be someone to be interested in talking. And, you know, because you could be 45 minutes. And someone, you know, let's say it was a 65-year-old gentleman who's worked in public service, and he's in retirement mode, and he's an elegantly dressed individual, and we're sitting on the veranda, and I say, you know, start asking questions, got my notebook out, and I'm taping it so I don't mess anything up. And then it's like, you know, why are you writing a book to young African-American males? You know, what a ridiculous thing to do. If you want to hide something from them, write it in a book. You know, that's what I was told. And so the whole idea is, you know, then I happened upon a question that changed the tone of every single interview, every single time. And sometimes took us from 45 minutes to 6, 8 hours. And dear friendships emerging, sometimes ending up hugging in tears. And here's the question. Do you remember the moment when you realized that because of the color of your skin, that the rules are somehow different for you? Now you take a look at that question and you say, that's a ridiculous question. It's not open-ended. You're looking for a yes or no response, right? I never got a yes or no response. Going back to 65-year-old man, I got 2 minutes left. Okay. He's looking out the window, he's sighing, he looks back at me and says, with brilliant clarity, what happened to him when he was 6 years of age. Remember what he was wearing. Remember the time of day. Remember where he's coming from, where he's going to. Can remember with brilliant clarity how his mother or father or both responded when he said what he heard. From that point on, the loss of innocence. Grief has to do with loss. And it's the whole idea. I want to close with this. Count Cullen, from the Harlem Renaissance, wrote this poem. He called it the incident. I'd like to call it, rename it, if you will, for the purposes of our time together, called The Moment. Once riding in old Baltimore, heart filled, head filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean kept looking straight at me. I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger, so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December, and of all the things that happened there, that's all I can remember. Began to see the grieving process. I want to close with this. Where do we take all this? I believe there's an upward journey, connecting or reconnecting with our Creator. I believe there's an inward journey, dealing with the mental, emotional crap that happens in every one of our lives, and grieving about it, dealing with it. And then there's an outward journey. And the outward journey is, I believe that God is raising up in a special way the people of African descent through the Joseph principle. It takes a courageous person of African descent to say, what was meant for evil, God meant for good in some redemptive way. I don't even know how to say those words. I believe in the 1040 window, people who have dealt with colonialism for centuries, people who are sick and tired of white imperialism, and I don't say that as a self-hating person or anything, it's just a matter of history. Someone of African descent can come into that region as a missionary. And I think this is all about intercultural global missions. God raising up a giant of African American church to go out to share the gospel with one less barrier skin color, and be able to communicate the riches of the gospel of Christ. And then other ways that we can do this, I've got a whole proposal to the NFL right now about the kneeling situation. I can't go into detail about it, but we're in dialogue right now. Black History Galleries. To be able to develop an entrepreneurial type of base, to be able to build people up, to learn how to deal with objections and rejection through entrepreneurial efforts. And different other things that we're involved with in our foundation. And I want to encourage every one of you here, bloom where you're planted, look for curiosity, be curious about things, and just see how the Lord can use you in your own way, using your personality, your experience, to be able to start connecting in a whole deeper way with other people that are different, and also looking for ways that you can make a difference, whether it's whatever it is, that the Lord will give you the wisdom on what to do. That's all, folks.
All right.